You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, De'Aaron Fox will miss the rest of the season due to finger surgery. Reviewing the Spurs' last 3 games. Looking at where the Spurs' remaining schedule stands, as well as other lottery teams within their range. Finally, previewing the upcoming games for this upcoming week. It's only been a couple of days since I last recorded an episode of the Spot Up Pod. The last episode came out back on Tuesday, and the Spurs have played 3 games since that span that I'll review. But before that, I want to get to some of the breaking news that came out on Thursday. So on Thursday, the Spurs did announce that De'Aaron Fox would miss the remainder of the season, of the regular season, to undergo surgery for that injured pinky finger that he arrived with in San Antonio, an injury that he sustained back in October in training camp with the Sacramento Kings when he was still part of their team. Now, this wasn't too much of a surprise because Fox himself had said after the Spurs' game in Sacramento about a week or two ago that he was probably going to have surgery around the time when the Spurs visited Los Angeles against the Lakers, which is coming up on Monday, March 17th. At that time, it was pretty iffy if Fox was going to get surgery or not. The big new news I would say is that Fox he was gonna miss the rest of the season in terms of those 3 games before that date against the Lakers on March 17th. So that was more, I would say, the more surprising news was the fact that the Spurs didn't have him play out the remainder of this past weekend with the 3 games. Instead, they just had him miss the last 2 games before he undergoes the surgery, or the 3 games, before the surgery. The surgery is scheduled to take place on Tuesday in Los Angeles, again, when the Spurs are on the road at LA. And according to the Spurs' press release, Fox will miss the remainder of the season, but he is expected to make a full recovery and be ready to go for the start of next season. So again, that was the news that came out this past week on Thursday. And so with that, let's go to break down the Spurs' last 3 games from this past week. Let's go back to Wednesday. The Spurs were hosting the Dallas Mavericks for the second time after the Spurs had lost a game to Dallas on Monday with just 8 players. Fox was still available for this game. The Spurs were favored by 6 because, again, Dallas was down to, I think, 9 or 10 players only. Basically, it was close in the first half. The Spurs got some separation, though, in the third quarter. They led by as many as 15 points, and they ended up winning by 10 points. Fox, in his final game for the regular season with the Spurs, he had one of his best performances, almost getting a triple-double with 32 points, 11 assists, 9 rebounds, and 1 steal. Keldon Johnson, as he's been doing all post-All-Star break, had a good night off the bench with 18 points off the bench. Jeremy Sohan was also getting going near the rim with 18 points off the bench as well. And he mentioned how De'Aaron Fox is doing a great job of finding him there, especially open when the defense isn't, paying too much their focus mainly on Fox. And so Sohan is kind of slipping by, being there for cuts, for some offensive rebounds, rolling as well. And so Fox did a great job of finding Sohan on this night, and Sohan ends up with 18 points. The Spurs did a great job of really attacking Dallas's limited amount of players there in the front court, and so they attacked them inside the paint all night. They also did a better job of shooting from the free throw line because that was one of the areas where they had trouble when they lost to Dallas on Monday. And then not only that, they had one of their better defensive games since losing Wemby, where this was the first time since losing Wemby for the rest of the season that the Spurs have held an opponent only scored 30 points or more in just 1 quarter of the 4 quarters of a game. Usually that's been happening a lot more, where teams are getting over 30 on the Spurs' defense without Victor. But in this game, that was the first time that they held the Mavs to 3 quarters of fewer than 30 points. And then the Spurs also did a great job in limiting their fouls, and also their defense is more aggressive, forcing turnovers from Dallas, and then also a better job on the glass as well, because that has been an issue for the Spurs. So that was on Wednesday, De'Aaron Fox's last regular season game with the Spurs. Then on Friday, the Spurs are hosting the Charlotte Hornets, who did beat the Spurs back in February when Fox had just joined the Spurs team. The Spurs were favored by 3, despite being without Fox and without Victor in this game, and it did not go according to plan. The Hornets had a historic night for their franchise and also for the Spurs' franchise in a bad way, where basically it was a blowout for most of the night, with the Hornets making a new Charlotte Hornets franchise record 26 threes in the game. And also for the Spurs' defense, that was also a franchise high that they've given up for an opponent. So that's why it was not a good night historically for the Spurs as well. Basically, by halftime, this one, the Hornets had made 18 threes, which tied the NBA record for most threes made in the first half. And basically, with 6:44 left, the Spurs are down by 20, I think it was 26 points at that time. Coach Mitch Johnson finally just pulls the rotation players. And the end of the bench players actually came in. Players like Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, Mamu, who else? Jordan McLaughlin. And they actually played pretty well, where they actually made it a more respectable loss, where they only lost the Spurs by 11 points overall. But again, we knew that game was pretty early. Offensively, two of the Spurs' 20-point scorers were rookie Stephon Castle. He went back into the starting lineup now that Fox is out for the rest of the season. And Castle finishes up with 26 points to lead the Spurs. Devin Vassell also had a good scoring night with 22 points. But again, it was on the defensive end where the Spurs lost this game. LaMelo Ball, Josh Green, and Nick Smith Jr. all made 6 or more threes in this game. And not only that, I mean, the Hornets just got a lot of threes, where 59% of their threes were shot wide open in this game. And the Coach Johnson mentioned how the Spurs just weren't physical enough. Stephon Castle mentioned how the Spurs just didn't close out well enough, and that allowed Charlotte to get into a good rhythm early. And they obviously, had a historic shooting night. I mean, aside from just, the Spurs leaving them open, they just made a lot of threes. I mean, they were taking some deep ones too, like 36, or not 36, like 26, 40, 30 feet away from the basket at times, and they were still going in. So again, just a historic shooting night for the Hornets. And the Spurs' defense, again, could have been a little bit more physical, and they weren't. And again, their defense led to that loss against the Hornets. So the Hornets end up sweeping the Spurs this year. San Antonio goes 0-2 against Charlotte. Then let's go to Saturday, the most recent game. This is the second out of a back-to-back. The Spurs are at home still. They are hosting the New Orleans Pelicans for the final time this season. The Pelicans, I will say, were favored by 2. They were without Zion. The Spurs, of course, were without De'Aaron Fox and without Wemby. But the Pelicans did have Trey Murphy III. They did have C.J. McCollum as well out there. And so basically this game was close throughout. But then in the third quarter, fueled by Keldon Johnson and Jeremy Sohan, the Spurs put together a 17-0 run with their bench group. And that ends up getting some separation away from New Orleans, where the Spurs go into the fourth quarter with a 9-point lead. The Pelicans, though, do battle back, and they get it down to crunch time with 4 minutes left. At one point, the Spurs are only leading by 2 points. C.J. McCollum has a 14-foot pull-up jumper that he takes against the Spurs defender. The shot goes out, which would have tied the game. And then on the next possession, the Spurs run some offense where they're trying to get Kelly Olynyk, New Orleans' big, switched onto Stephon Castle in isolation. Castle gets the switch, but instead of attacking Olynyk inside, he ends up taking a step-back 3 that misses. But Keldon Johnson makes a big play here. He gets the offensive rebound off Castle's miss. Keldon finds Devin Vassell. Vassell now gets Kelly Olynyk in a switch again, and this time Vassell takes a pull-up 3, and he makes it to give the Spurs a 5-point lead. From that point, it basically became like the Spurs making free throws down the stretch, the Pelicans making a few buckets here and there. And so basically the Spurs did hold on there to win by 4 points. One thing that we're seeing the Spurs do in some of these close games is that they are letting the younger players who are going to probably be around for the next few years here on the team, they're letting those players close out the game. So what the Spurs did was when crunch time first happened, Chris Paul was in the game. Then quickly Paul exited the game, so that way Castle could come in, close out the game. Julian Champagnie, Devin Vassell, Sohan, and Keldon. So the younger players ended up closing out the game with Paul on the bench. And not only that, Harrison Barnes was having a good scoring night, but the team didn't bring him back in crunch time as well to allow the younger players to see if they hold on for this win. They were able to make the plays down the stretch, and they ended up getting the win. So again, it was more so a learning experience for the young players to get that win in crunch time. Devin Vassell leads the team in scoring with 22 points. Harrison Barnes, like I mentioned, had a good scoring night with 19 points. Keldon, of course, off the bench with 19 points, especially shooting the 3-ball well in that game. Stephon Castle gets the start, ends up with 17 points. Jeremy Sohan as well, 14 points. Julian Champagnie, 12 points, and then Mamu, 10 points. So obviously you heard me read a lot of bench players there. It's because the Spurs' bench did a great job where pretty much all of New Orleans' main scoring came from their starters. They didn't really have a bench to go to, whereas the Spurs did. They had multiple players get over 10 points off the bench. And so the Spurs' bench ends up outscoring the Pelicans' bench 55-24, and that was a key difference. The Pels didn't shoot historically like the Hornets did, where the Spurs did a great job. They were more physical there on the 3-point line of running the Pelicans off the line and making them closing out well, and so the Pelicans didn't get as many looks as the Hornets got against the Spurs' defense. And then not only that, the Spurs' defense was just more aggressive in forcing turnovers from the Pelicans ball handlers, and then also the Spurs did a great job on the glass of taking care of the glass, and that's kind of what it comes down to a lot of times is the Spurs winning the glass, the rebounding battle, and then also being more aggressive defensively in forcing turnovers. With all the injuries that the Spurs have sustained, especially to like Wemby and Fox now for the rest of the season, some other players have been getting more minutes as we've seen the rotation, and those two players are Blake Wesley and Sandro Mamukelashvili. So we have seen them come in at different quarters or at times, playing in spot minutes here and there. But Wesley's been out there to obviously provide his hounding defense, really putting pressure on the ball handler, bringing the ball up the floor. Not only that, he's pushing the ball whenever he gets a defensive rebound, but then also he's been tested from three. Teams will leave him open. He's made a few here in these last few games. Mamu as well just brings his energy, crashes the glass, very active, cutting, finding players with his passing as well as shooting the three ball. So Wesley and Mamu have been given extra minutes due to the limitations with the healthy players on the roster right now. And then not only that, Chris Paul, as we've seen in a few games lately, the Spurs have been cutting his minutes a little bit here in these last few games, especially in the Hornets game because it was a blowout, but then also in the second game against New Orleans, where he didn't play in crunch time, like I mentioned, or they took him out early in crunch time. So we have seen Chris Paul, even though, yes, he's going to finish the season with the Spurs, he can't be waived and signed with the playoff team. He's at least, getting his minutes still, but not as many, and then letting the younger players there finish out the game is what the Spurs are showing with Paul's minutes lately. So my prediction from last week was I thought the Spurs would go 2-1. They actually did that. They went 2-1. However, the games were different. I thought they would beat Dallas, and I thought they would beat the Hornets, and no, they ended up losing to the Hornets of the three teams. I thought that they would lose to the Pelicans, but they ended up winning that game. Vegas also said the Spurs should go 2-1, and they went 2-1. So everything went according to plan. It was a better week for the Spurs with their games in terms of these last three games. Let's keep going. So for the main topic of this episode, what I really want to do is, now that we know that Fox is out for the rest of the season, I kind of want to see, if the Spurs can't get into the play-in tournament, because obviously they're still technically in the race for the play-in, but again, that doesn't look like that's like their priority right now. It looks like they're just trying to win as many games as they can with the players that are out there on the floor. But with Victor and Fox out, obviously it's going to be tough for them to get into the play-in tournament. But outside from that, looking at where do they project to kind of finish in the lottery with the roster that they still have in place, the players that are still getting minutes out there. So that's kind of what I want to focus on, is look at the Spurs and those other lottery teams here. So right now through the Spurs are 28-38, so they're 12th out west, and they have 16 games left in the regular season. That's where they currently stand. Now, like I said, they are still technically in the play-in race because they're just 4 games behind Dallas, who has been decimated by injuries for the remainder of the season, it looks like. So again, they're just 4 games behind Dallas, who is 10th in the play-in race, and they're just 2.5 games behind the Suns, who are actually trying to win games, but they're just all over the place. The Suns are not, they're just struggling as a team. It's more a chemistry issue than anything with them right now. So again, they're not actually out of it yet, but again, it doesn't look like that's kind of the path that they're headed toward. I do want to say, though, had Wemby not had the blood clot issue, and had Fox not undergone surgery, I think if Victor and Fox were actually healthy right now, I think that the Spurs would do a great job right now of making the play-in, because just the situation right now with the 10th seed basically up for grabs, with Dallas struggling as well due to injuries. But I mean, that's what happens, and so the Spurs do have the team that they have out there now. According to ESPN's BPI model, they don't see the Spurs as a play-in team or a playoff team. They basically give the Spurs a 0% chance. And these numbers were updated post the Spurs losing Fox. So again, right now the math models don't see the Spurs getting into the play-in tournament, despite how much Dallas is struggling out there. So that means that if they're not getting to the play-in tournament, they're going to be a lottery team. So that's kind of where I want to focus now. So here is the lottery order as of Sunday afternoon, about, I would say, 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So again, some of these teams that I'm going to mention are playing on Sunday, so their records might have changed by the time you hear this. And so here are those teams where everything stands. The Spurs right now in the lottery order, after getting the win over the Pelicans, they are 10th in the lottery order, and they are 4-6 in their last 10 games. So playing about winning 40% of their games lately. The Bulls are actually playing well. The Bulls are 9th in the lottery order, and they are 6-4 in their last 10 games. They are the Spurs are 0.5 games ahead of the Bulls. The Portland Trailblazers are 8th in the lottery order. The Spurs are also zero point 0.5 games ahead of the Blazers. The Blazers, they were playing pretty well in February, but now they've kind of slipped a little bit. They're 4-6, just like the Spurs in their last 10 games. The Toronto Raptors are playing better basketball. They are 7th in the lottery order. They have a pretty decent lead in front of the Spurs. So the Spurs are 4.5 games in front of Toronto, who are 7th. But the Raptors are playing good basketball. They're 6-4 in their last 10. The Philadelphia 76ers are 6th in the lottery order. They are the Spurs are 6 games ahead of them, and they are struggling. They are 2-8, and that's kind of in a way on purpose because they need a tank. Well, for one, they're missing some of their best players. Joel Embiid's out. I think Paul George has been out as well, and so the Sixers need to tank because if they get 1 through 6 in the lottery, they get to keep their pick. If not, it goes to OKC. So in a way, the Sixers are purposely tanking with the team that they have out there on the floor right now. Then there's the Brooklyn Nets, who the Spurs recently defeated. The Brooklyn Nets are 5th right now in the lottery order. The Spurs are 6.5 games in front of them, and they are struggling right now. They are 1-9, even though they're playing a lot of their players. Like Nick Claxton's is out there in games. So is Cam Johnson. Those are still, having their players out there. Some of the rotation players are still not getting wins out there, is what it looks like. And we saw the Spurs defeat them recently, and plus Cam Thomas now is out for the rest of the season. So the Nets are going to be tough to catch for the Spurs because they are 1-9 in their last 10. They're really struggling out there. Now, what does ESPN's BPI model say? What do they project that how these teams finish? So BPI projects the Sixers to finish 5th with 26 wins, the Nets to finish 6th with 27 wins, the Spurs 7th with 31.7 wins, the Raptors 8th, 31.9 wins, the Bulls 9th at 34.8 wins, and then the Blazers 10th with 34.8 wins. So again, BPI says that the Spurs should finish 7th in the lottery order. Now, let's look at their strength of schedule for all these teams according to Positive Residual. Out of these, It's 6 teams. Yeah. So out of these 6 teams, the Spurs have the third most difficult schedule in the NBA. So again, the Spurs have a very tough schedule left in terms of strength of schedule for their opponents remaining. The Blazers have the next toughest schedule, but it's ranked 15th. The Bulls' schedule is ranked 17th, so again, not very difficult. The Nets' schedule is 20th, and not as difficult either. The Sixers' schedule is 21st, not as difficult either. But then the Raptors have the 30th toughest schedule, which is basically the easiest schedule left in the league. And so Toronto, again, has one of the weakest schedules left there in the NBA. Plus, they're playing good basketball right now at 6-4. So what I did was, I kind of looked at all the teams, looked at their remaining games as of Sunday afternoon, and I looked at 2 different categories. I looked at who do they have as a postseason push team. So that means that these teams might already be in the playoffs, or they're in the play-in, or they're at least trying to fight to get into the playoffs. Somebody like the Phoenix Suns, right? They're trying to get into the play-in. They're kind of right there on the verge, and they're trying to win ball games. Some teams with losing records, like the Orlando Magic, have a losing record, but obviously we know that they are gearing up for the playoffs. So those kind of teams are the teams that are considered postseason push teams. Then I have the lottery focused teams. These are teams that are obviously, they know that the lottery is probably going to be their destination, and so or they're not like forcing players back, early. They're just letting them rest and kind of getting as healthy as they can with the season that's left. Somebody like Dallas might fall in here, where yes, the Mavs are trying to hold on, but they're not going to like push everyone back, quickly just to try to get the 10th seed right now, especially with Kyrie Irving out for the rest of the season. Okay, so here's how this works. I'm going to go from most difficult path here to easiest path. So the team with the most difficult schedule left is the Brooklyn Nets. They have 15 games left. They have 12 teams that are playoff push teams, and they have just 3 teams that are basically tanking or looking to the lottery. Then the Spurs have the next most difficult schedule here. They have 16 games left. They have 12 teams pushing for the play-in or the playoffs, and they only have 4 teams that are basically lottery focused. From there, it's the 76ers. They have 11 teams pushing for the playoffs and just 5 teams looking at the lottery. Then it's the Blazers, who have 15 games left. 10 teams are focused on the playoffs. 5 teams are focused on the lottery. Then the easier schedules are the Bulls. They have 15 games left. just 8 teams are focused on the playoffs. 7 of their opponents are looking at the lottery. And then finally, the easiest schedule, like mentioned earlier, from strength of schedule, is the Raptors. They have 15 games left. The Raptors only have this is wild. The Raptors only have 4 teams left on their schedule that are kind of aiming for the playoffs or the play-in. The other 11 teams are all like lottery-bound teams, or like looking at probably going into the lottery. So again, the Raptors' schedule is just wow. I just can't believe that that's the schedule they have in front of them. So basically, I don't see, if everything goes according to plan, according to these models and what the schedules look like, I don't see the Spurs being able to catch Brooklyn and Philly, because those 2 teams, they have very difficult schedules. Plus, they're already struggling with the teams that the rosters that they have out there. So again, I don't see them getting 5th or 6th. However, I do see them finishing ahead of the Bulls, the Blazers, and the Raptors. So basically, if they can do that to Spurs, they're going to get 7th in the lottery order. What does that mean? If you end up with 7th going into the lottery in April, that gives you a 32% chance at a top 4 pick and a 7.5% chance at the number 1 overall pick. So again, that's kind of where I think the Spurs can end up landing, now that we know that Fox is out for the rest of the season, as well as Wemby. Is can they end up going from 10th right now to maybe 7th in the lottery order? Because like I mentioned, I don't think they're going to catch Brooklyn or the Sixers after really digging into these numbers. Now, what does history tell us lately about what happens if you land 7th in the lottery? How much can you jump up or fall behind? So I just want to go through the last results for the lottery from the 7th position from 2019 until last year's draft in 2024. So let's go through this last 6 years. So back in 2019, the Pelicans got really lucky at 7th. At this time, the odds were a little bit different. They had a 6% chance of getting number 1, I think. And so basically, they moved up from 7th all the way to number 1 to get Zion Williamson. So again, that was 2019. That was from 7th to 1st. Then in 2020, the Chicago Bulls were 7th. They ended up moving it to 4th. They got 4th. They ended up drafting Patrick Williams. 2021, the Toronto Raptors are 7th. They end up moving to 4th as well, and they get Scotty Barnes. So again, 1st, 4th, 4th. Then 2022, the Kings are 4th. And not 4th, they're 7th, and they end up moving to 4th, and they get Keegan Murray. So again, 3 straight years where the number 7, the lottery order of 7th ends up getting the 4th pick. And then plus, of course, that 1 year, which was a rarity, which was Zion the Pelicans getting him from 7th all the way to 1st. But then the last 2 drafts have not, they've kind of stayed, they've kind of stayed, but then also got a little bit worse. So here's what happened. In 2023, the Indiana Pacers were 7th entering the lottery. They end up getting 7th in the lottery, so everything goes according to plan there. And they end up drafting Bilal Coulibaly, who ends up getting traded to the Wizards. So now he's on the Wizards. So again, in 2023, that was 7th. It turns into 7th. In 2024, the odds got a little bit worse, though, or not the odds, the luck, I guess you would say, got a little worse. The Memphis Grizzlies were 7th going into the lottery last year, and they end up falling 2 places to 9th, where they end up drafting Zach Edey. So basically, in these last 6 years, 4 of the years, the 7th place team ends up moving up in the lottery, and just 2 of the years they either stay the same or fall behind. So again, that's why if you're the Spurs, obviously, like I said, they're not intentionally tanking. If the Spurs were intentionally tanking, they would be resting Chris Paul, they'd be resting Harrison Barnes, they'd probably be resting Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, some of their core rotation players. But instead, they're just going out there with the healthy players that they have out there. And obviously, this team is just the players that they have out there without Fox and Wemby. They're gonna struggle in a lot of these games. Like I mentioned before, they're going to be underdogs in almost pretty much a lot of these games, except for that game against the Hornets, which they end up losing. And then also probably like the Sixers game, they're going to probably be favored in that one. But other contests, they're not going to be favored in a lot of these games. So again, just finishing out the season with the roster they have intact, they have a chance here to end up with the 7th pick in the lottery order, which again could mean moving up. Right now, based on history, that's been happening, or moving down as of these last 2 years. All right, before I close this episode, let's look at the Spurs' upcoming games for this coming week. There's 4 games on the schedule, so it's a busy week. On Monday, the Spurs travel to the Lakers to play Los Angeles Lakers. This is the rescheduled game from the one that was canceled back in or postponed back in January during LA's wildfires. So the Lakers are 5th in West. They are 6-4 in their last 10. This one, A prediction's kind of tough for this one because the Lakers are playing on Sunday as well against the Suns. So I don't know. I know LeBron's out right now. I don't know if Luka's going to play in a back-to-back. But because the Spurs do struggle usually on the road, I'm going to go ahead and take the Lakers, even if it's just like Austin Reeves being the Lakers' best player in this game. So again, I'll go with the Lakers in this one. On Monday. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs return home. They're hosting the New York Knicks. The Knicks are third in the East. I know they're without Jalen Brunson right now. They are 5-5 in their last 10 games, but still led by Cat and some of the other players they have on their roster. The Knicks. I'm going to go ahead and say the Spurs lose this game, so a loss for San Antonio. Then on Friday, the Spurs host these Philadelphia 76ers, who I mentioned are really struggling right now, and they're almost like tanking on purpose just to keep their pick. So the Sixers are 12th in the East. They're 2-8 in their last 10 games, really struggling. So I'm going to go ahead and say the Spurs win this one, and I do think the Spurs will be favored in this game as well. And then on Sunday, the Spurs are traveling on the road to another country, to Canada, to play the Raptors. The Raptors are 11th in the East. Like I mentioned, they've been playing much better basketball, 6-4 in their last 10, and they have one of the easier schedules left in the league. And so I'm going to say loss just because the Spurs are on the road, and against Toronto's been playing better basketball out there. So this week is going to, if the predictions go according to plan, this is going to be a tougher week for wins, where the Spurs are going to go 1-3 according to my prediction. But again, that'll improve the lottery odds. But again, we'll see, because last week it did go according to plan, but we'll see what happens. All right. So my next episode should be out on Monday, March 24th. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.